So you come from two very different places. Lisa, you're in Canada,
Mhm.
and Krista, you're here in Australia. You're 14,000 kilometers apart, but you've got a shared ambition and a common problem, and it's a massive one, right? You are now, both of you, I'm so proud to have you here. You're the tip of the spear of the world's class actions against Google, and maybe in the future Meta. And for those of you who don't know what these class actions are about, it's about the small guy taking on the big guy, using the courts to prove that Google's manipulated its monopoly to take all of the money out of the publishing industry. And this is a court case to try and return some of that money back to the publishers who need it to report the news for 4 billion people across the world. Now, Lisa, I'm going to come to you first. Lisa, you're the lead litigant in the case brought in Canada, and that's seeking $4 billion in damages from Google, and another $4 billion potentially from Meta. Perhaps you can tell us where we're up to on that, to compensate for ad revenue that you lost and other publishers have lost over there. Krista,
Correct.
Krista, you've just stepped up, congratulations, just in the last couple of days, as the lead litigant in Australia, seeking another $1 billion more from Google. So, welcome to you both. Thanks for coming. I'm honoured and genuinely thrilled to have two fearless publishers here with me who are willing to take on the big guys. Congrats to you. And it makes me wonder, actually, where the big publishers are. Where are the big guys that do all their virtue signalling about all the things that they want and demand so much? They're just cowering in the shadows, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that later. But today, this is about you. It's about you and your shared mission to save the industry. So thank you, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Us.
Us. It's us now. It used to be
So
one,
nice.
and now it's us.
Nice to have an us.
Yay,
God,
us.
thank God there's an us. Thank God there's someone ahead of us.
Yeah, we did it.
So Lisa, let me begin with you. Give the listeners a quick overview of your case, why you did it, and where it's up to.
So I joined our case back in January of 2022. Basically was approached by Soto's law firm, who felt that there was an opportunity for us to do a class action lawsuit against Facebook and Meta and Google. Basically, they came to me because none of the large publishers in Canada would touch it with a 10-foot pole. They were so used to the pittance and the dog scraps that they were fed by, in my opinion, by Google and Facebook, that they didn't want to rock the boat. And really, quite honestly, it's a coward move. Sometimes you just got to stand up to bullies. And they came to Alberta and asked if we would. I'm an independent publisher, so I'm not hampered by big industry telling me what I can and can't do. And within 3 minutes of our conversation, I said, let's do it. And it's been a roller coaster ever since.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a little bit about that, and I'm going to ask you about the case and how the case is progressing. But I think the question that's right on the tip of everybody's lips, I think, when they hear about you and the work that you've done, is why is it you? Like, why isn't it one of the really big publishers? Why have they not stepped up?
I think, they're scared. I often analogize
You're
it
scared,
like,
Lisa, as well.
yeah, me? No, I'm not scared of anybody, but especially not them. But I think I often analogize it to a dog that's been given scraps of food. So it's like the Pavlov, dog theory. You're given a little bit of scraps here and there in an industry that's already been declining over a 10-year period. So it's been incremental decay of our industry by these groups. And then they're given a little bit of scraps here and there, and then they're willing to accept the scraps. And unlike them, I'm not willing to accept the scraps. I've never backed down from a fight in my life, and I'm certainly not going to back down from them. And I think we're going to win this. And it's not just about winning money. It's about ethics. It's about fairness. It's about doing what's right. And if you don't do what's right, evil will prosper when good men do nothing. That's a saying that sticks with me all the time. And there's truth to power in that. And we need to fight for what is right. And I think the world doesn't do enough of that. We're so busy worrying about who we're going to offend or who we're scared of that we never actually just say, you know what you're doing is wrong, and I'm going to hold you accountable. And I'm going to hold them accountable until I'm told not to.
Bravo. Amazing. Krista, great to know. Great to have you in.
I would just like to say everything that Lisa said so well just then, but in a broad Australian accent.
Yeah, do it. Easily.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You can hear the passion, can't you?
Krista,
Yeah.
let's start with, tell us a little bit about your paper. And I can see some of them on the wall there behind you. Tell us a little bit about your title, your history in publishing, and why you're stepping up where others fear to tread.
So our newspaper we're a legacy print product in a small town in the Riverina region of New South Wales called Hay. We've got a population of 2,500, 3,000 people. We, up until a couple of years ago, purely print. The paper started in 1873, so it's got a very long history of standing up for the town, and there's a history of being part of different movements as they went around, like Riverina State movements way back in the 1800s, and really championing for a high school to be built and all those kind of things. The editors and the newspaper have really been part of anything that the community needs and the community needs to say, and that's what we want to continue to happen. So we're really we're a hyper local newspaper. I worked here backwards and forwards for maybe 12 or 15 years, making ads and doing bits and pieces. And then I've always loved to write. I would do some sports stories, and the newspaper would print them for me, and bits and pieces. I was fortunate that one of the co-owners, so I own the newspaper with my business partner who is the editor, but another gentleman, Rod McCulley, was ready to retire, and he wanted to sell his shares, and he offered them to me, and he offered me time to pay for them, and he was, without that opportunity, I wouldn't be here today. So it was massive, and I jumped at that because it was like I'd finally found what I wanted to do when I grew up. So Tertia and I, we've got a tiny team, but a really gunned, female team. We then broke into, took this huge digital leap forward, and we launched a website. So that was big. We started trying to sell some ad space on that website and use it to kind of prop up the financials of the business. So that's how I ended up here in this chair after going backwards and forwards, working part-time for a while. And that's kind of, our digital journey is very late behind most other people, I suppose, because we had, Rod was very much a print first mentality, which we have there's no plans at all to ever go out of our print product. We're very proud of it, and we're very proud of the fact that we're able to sustain that, because we think that's a point of difference as well to corporate newspapers. But we recognise that we also need to try and generate some digital income and, have a wider audience as well.
Amazing. So we met in person. I was down speaking on stage at the Victorian Country Press Association down in Melbourne. I was raging a little bit about trying to change the industry. I did my whole presentation about how Google had taken down the industry and shown it line by line by line using the evidence from the antitrust case. And then kind of my punchline at the end was, be like Lisa. And I literally put a picture of Lisa up on the screen and just said, this is what she's doing, be like this. And then I walked off the stage, and I was going to go and get one of those really bad filter coffees, at the urn, because that's what you do at conferences, with the cream that makes you feel like kind of sick. And as I was going, I got cornered by a group of people that were in the audience. And then, Krista's laughing because, literally, I was up against the recording booth, surrounded by kind of about 15 or 20 publishers, all saying, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about this. And then from that, Krista, you've stepped up. So where are you in your case? Because I think this is only the second interview you've given about being in this, because it's a very recent announcement.
Very recent, yes.
Where are you so far? And if the answer is I don't know, it's up to the lawyers, that's absolutely fine. But you're right at the very beginning. So tell us where you're at.
And a lot of the answer will be not quite sure, but we have a great, it sounds really strange to say we have a great team of litigators. That's how fancy we are at the moment. So we had hoped that our case would have been filed by Morris Blackburn Tuesday afternoon, which we just asked them to work in with our publishing schedule so that we could break the story, of course, because it's all about we wanted to break the story before it.
Yes, funny that. We're still journos, even when we're reporting about ourselves, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we needed a front page teaser and we needed a page 3 story. But it was.
Is that why you did it? You were short of a page 3 lead?
Yeah, absolutely. And we, not entirely, but we were very lucky that Miranda and her team truly wanted to work with us so that we could break the story to our town. We wanted to make sure that our town knew what we were doing before, ABC rang for an interview or Ricky wanted us to do a podcast on a Sunday morning, which is equally terrifying. But that filing was actually delayed. But of course, it's print media. Our story had already gone to bed, so we were off and running. There's another Australian action that has already been filed with the courts, so I think they had some sort of hearing, and you'll have to take my description of that as some sort of hearing on Friday afternoon, with the 2 sets of lawyers, and Miranda tells me that our case will be filed in the courts within a week or so. But we're very obvious, they had to speak and say that they were acting on behalf of us, so it was no longer, it's not that it's a secret, but it was no longer confidential because they were definitely acting for us.
So Australia's class action train is on the tracks, Lisa, and yay. And so there are class actions emerging in the UK, all over Europe. There are several in South America I'm aware of. America's taking a slightly different track. Quelle surprise. But here it's now underway, and you have to start somewhere. You have to step out and take the first step. And so, Krista, there's a lot to come. So, Lisa, can you give Krista a kind of sense of, she's back where you were when you first started. What's likely to happen next? What's kind of in the road ahead?
Well, it goes pretty slow, actually. So we're in 2025, and we're just at the point where we're going for certification. So basically, there was very little movement from 2022 until March of 2024. In that interim, of course, they were gathering all their information, using their experts. And in that time, we were able to get OmniBridge to fund our lawsuit, which
right. Lisa, just so people know, explain OmniBridge, because one of the reasons that lots of people are afraid of joining a class action is that they think they're going to be having to put in the money to compete with Google, and Google has quite a lot of money. Looking at my numbers, hang on, let me see. $238 billion in ad revenue last year, 307 billion altogether. They can afford a couple of lawyers, it's not a problem for them. They've got $98 billion in cash in the bank. But it's not quite as scary as it sounds, because, Lisa?
No, it isn't, because, we initially had no funding. It was going to be internally funded with our law firm, and Sotos is a boutique law firm. They're amazing and brilliant and smart. But you're right, there's limited funds when you're going up, a company as big as Meta and Google are. And so we applied for third-party funding with a company called OmniBridgeway, and basically they're I believe based out of Australia. I think they're a Swiss-based company based out of Australia. And I don't believe that there had been a third-party funder in this country, and there's very little that's done in North America. It's quite prevalent in Europe. So basically what they're made up, it's a hedge fund made up of retired lawyers and judges, and they look at different lawsuits around the world. And they decide if they think it's a viable lawsuit, they fund the cost of the lawsuit, and then they get a percentage of the winnings. I had to interview with them. I had to show that I was confident that this was what we were doing, and they decided to fund it. That's when it got real. It got real when they funded us, because that kind of said to me that they're not going to fund something that they don't think that there's an opportunity to win. And so when you have those kind of legal minds looking at something, they funded it. So it's no money out of my pocket. There's no money out of Sotos's pocket. It's all of the funding for this lawsuit is coming through a third-party funder. We had a few hiccups there because it's a sliding scale when they get their funding, so they can get paid a certain amount up to the funding increases for the amount of years of the litigation, rightly so, because they're putting out more money. And I think at one point the judge wanted to cap it at I think 10%. Omnibridge wanted 12%, so I had to agree that that was a reasonable amount. Without Omnibridge, honestly, we wouldn't have a lawsuit because we could not fund what is coming at us. It's been 3 years of pretty intense work on Sosa's side for us to even get to the motion to strike last March. So last March, Google and Facebook together took us to court for a motion to strike, saying it was a frivolous lawsuit. It was at the federal courts.
Did it feel frivolous to you, Lisa?
Oh, I mean, it's so not frivolous that I took 4 days out of my life to fly across the country. I mean, for me to fly from here to Toronto was a 2.5-hour drive to an airport and then a 4-hour flight to Toronto. I was putting the newspaper out in a hotel room, trying to get a newspaper put out because we're such a small newsroom. But I sat in that courtroom for 3 days. So the judge had to know that I was real. This isn't the same as somebody suing because a candy bar was wrapped incorrectly. This is the most important lawsuit for our industry that we're ever going to have. And I felt like we needed a face to that lawsuit. And so I flew out there. I sat in the courtroom. I looked Google, Facebook right in the face and said, this is who the Paso Herald is. And I'm representing all the newspapers in this country. So have fun, because I'm not backing down. And we ended up winning. To some extent, we won. The judge said that the case that he felt there was an absolute case against Google, and Google did not appeal that. So that is going to go forward. Facebook said the judge felt that Facebook and Google did not have a vertical arrangement or a horizontal arrangement, that it was a vertical arrangement. We are appealing that. So the appeal is going through in February and March. Based on what happens there, we're going to go for certification and in May, June. So we're actually getting to the meat and bones of the whole thing.
So you're still trying to get Meta back in?
We are, yeah, absolutely. And I think as we move forward and more information's coming out, I think that, the judges that are watching this and the courts, the appellant courts that are seeing this, are seeing what's happening in the rest of the world. And that wasn't happening back in March. We were this lone country that was going after Google and Facebook. But now as more of these lawsuits come forward and more countries are seeing it, and the DOJ is actually holding Meta accountable, we see that. The rest of the world sees what's happening when it goes to those kind of cases. So, our team feels that we're going to win this appeal and that there's going to be merit to that as well.
Amazing. Look, a groundswell starts a movement, and I think we're in the movement.
It does. Yeah. It certainly does.
So just quickly, on the Meta joining the case, Krista, I don't think Meta's in the Australian case, is it? So no. In some of the other class actions around the world, just to bring everybody up to speed, is that there was an arrangement between Google and Meta that was done in the back rooms way back in the day that was called Jedi Blue. And the logic was that Meta was thinking of getting into the programmatic advertising space, which would have made it a competitor to Google. So Google gave them a preferential deal on advertising out of sight of the rest of the market and gave them an anti-competitive leg up on how to advertise and what they had to pay for it if they agreed not to compete. So this is a part of the anti-competitive allegations against Google, and there are court cases listed in America to challenge this, called Jedi Blue. And it was called Jedi, just so everybody knows, because it's kind of very Google, to give you an idea of how they work. It was called Jedi because everybody knew that it was absolutely insane and totally wrong, but the hope was that it was because it was Google, they could enact a Jedi mind trick where everybody would just accept it and just go, those are not the droids you're looking for. They literally thought they could pull that off until the courts found them. So read that as you will. What I wanted to ask you next is that there is a lot of work involved in this. And so Krista, this comes back to you. What do you want to win? What does success look like for you? I know you're right at the very beginning, all right, but you must have gone into it with your eyes open with the intention of achieving something. In the perfect end of this, which might be a few years away, what is it, do you think?
Change. So fairness, a change, that it is a fair system. And I know that sounds very naive and lofty and all the rest of it, but that's why we are involved. So just a very Australian, just a fair go in a competitive market. That's all. And it really shouldn't take lawsuits all across the world with little newspapers being the ones to stand up for that to happen. Yeah, but here we are.
Okay. So one of the things that I've seen around the world, and Lisa, Canada kind of leads the way on this, is that many governments around the world have stepped up to fund local journalism more, to provide various handouts. And then, of course, Google and Meta, or Google more, Meta less so now, have jumped on the bandwagon with the Google News Initiative and other kind of, support. It's presented as support, but it's almost like a way of maintaining the status quo and not shaking the monopoly, right? We've reached a case, I think I was told recently, so Canada's just got $100 million payout from Google, which some publishers are celebrating, but others feel has kind of made it a kind of social security support network for publishers without them having to stand on their own 2 feet. Krista, what we're fighting for here is a fair go, the opportunity to compete fairly on a level playing field, right? You're not asking for a handout. Have I got that right?
No, just the fair go. Just that you have choices, publishers and to a lesser extent readers, audience, local business have choices in their advertising on digital platforms that is competitive and fair. So that when and clear, like the whole thing around using AdSense is that it's to me deliberately difficult to navigate. Deliberately, well, I feel, and I'm quite low tech, I'll admit that, but it's not transparent enough to be able to say we will sell it for this and you will get this much from it. So that you can make a decision about will I sign up or not, and if I decide not to because I'm not really keen on that deal, what else can I do? There is no other market, there is no other competitor.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? There is nowhere else to go. It's our road, it's our way or the highway, and that's the end of it. Oh, and by the way, we might not tell you how it's going to perform either because we don't need to. That's really been the crux of the antitrust trials that have been taking place in America, which feel awfully distant, I think, to local publishers on the other side of the world, but couldn't really be more impactful. Lisa, I remember you told me when we were in Canada. I was speaking at a conference that you were at, right, on Prince Edward Island. You told me. Well, do you remember we were sat on those little leather chairs in the kind of window of that lobby of that hotel, and you said to me you knew that Google was a problem when, and you suddenly started to see some of your ads just disappear. Can you just talk us through that? Because that's the real world experience of what this Google thing is. The real life experience is an ad that used to be here has just suddenly gone. Can you just talk through that?
Yeah, sure. It started in about 2014, and I don't know how it works in Australia, but in Canada we have ad reps. So they basically sell national advertising. So things like Ford and GM and the big corporations of Canada, they would buy ads in our newspapers, and that was a huge part of our revenue. Like the national advertising was massive, so we would get these big full page ads. You could count on these ads every week, so that you didn't have to rely as heavily on your local advertising. It was there, but you could really do the right kind of reporting, because you could go to a local council meeting and you could report on things that perhaps the mayor and the council didn't like. And for example, for me one time, I didn't like what a council was doing, and so they pulled all of my municipal advertising. So $30,000 just out the door. I wrote something they didn't like. But I could weather that because I had those national ads coming in. So it gave me a level of independence, journalism integrity and independence that allowed me to weather that storm. I ended up going after that council in the next election after what they did to the newspaper. All 7 of them were kicked out. So that was that power of the press, the power of doing what's right, because you could weather that storm. But then I started seeing, one week I was waiting for my national, we would get our ad run for the week, and GM was gone. And I thought, oh, well, maybe that's just this week. And then the next week, GM was gone. And the next week it was gone. And the next week it was gone. And I didn't know why it was gone. So I called our association, our local association, and said, where's my ad? That's the ad rep ran out of, was our Alberta Weekly Newspaper Association. And they said, well, you know, you're a remote community and you don't have a dealership, and we think that's why they're pulling out. So at that point, they didn't even know what was going on. And they were getting these kind of, these half truths of, well, you know, you're remote and you're not in the area. Then I lost Ford, which used to go every other week. Then I lost Ford. And then I lost Dodge. And then I started losing every national ad I had, to the point where by 2017, I had nothing. I was 100% relied on community advertising. And so my revenue stream in that 10-year period went from 350,000 of net revenue to 150,000. So I took a $200,000 loss per year, and it was cyclical. So it was, you know, 50,000 that year, 80,000 the next year. But by the time I got to 2017, I was down to basically nothing. We had to lay off half of our staff. I started delivering newspapers. I was stuffing flyers. It was like I was 15 years old in my mom's paper again, stuffing flyers and delivering newspapers. There's been some good that's come out of that because it happened to me so early. I learned how to change my business model. I learned how to, you know, do a lot of things that allow us to stay as a newspaper, which the bigger newspapers in this country haven't done, and that's why they're really suffering and reliant on it. But I had to change the way I did my business. But that's where it happened. And when I went to the association, nobody could tell me until finally, probably around 2016, 2017, they said, hey, all this money's going to Google. And it started with me, but then it hit every paper in the country. So it was just a sliding scale of decimation.
Krista, does that ring a bell? Is that how it kind of has visited upon you, or is it more that, you know, you tell us?
Probably not for our newspaper, because our ad reps are more centred around they do the government advertising.
Mm-hmm.
We really have to go knocking on doors if we want to get a Toyota ad.
Mm.
So we're very reliant on local business or regional business. But that was my reasoning, that if I could create some advertising revenue using AdSense and our website, then I wouldn't have to put up the ad rates for our local butcher. And I could employ another journalist to make sure we could get out to, like at the moment, one of the churches is threatening to sell a church, a village, 80 kilometres away. But we still had the staff that we could send someone out there to speak to those people, take the photo, not just do it by phone. So that was my thinking. We could keep the cover charge low. We could keep the advertising for local business low, because I was going to make this imaginary digital income that would support and benefit the entire local business community. That's what I was hoping for, which is just not possible.
So you raise a really, really interesting point here that people have tried to explain in courts all over the world and kind of failed to do so, but that was one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of it. So you should think about a secondary career as a lawyer. So one of the criticisms... Well, are you going to tell me you are a lawyer?
No. Barely a journo.
Well, one of the biggest criticisms of monopoly is that the story, Google's defense in court, is that we have organized the world's advertising and made it cheaper and easier for everyone. That's their argument. But what you've just described is the opposite. What it says is that if you're a massive multinational corporate like Ford, it might be a little bit easier, okay? And it might even be a little bit cheaper in the shorter run. But your guy in your local butcher, his prices are going up. Yeah. And
we run a filler ad every now and then, just a house ad that says, Facebook doesn't employ anyone in Hay.
That's right. Or donate to their hockey teams, donate to...
We actually run that as a print ad every now and then if we need to.
Yeah.
We did the same thing. We tried to run ads on our Facebook or like on our web page, and we made nothing. Like the amount of money it cost me to hire somebody to do that and to revamp my web page was more money than it cost to just not do anything. And I think we were getting, at one point when we tried to get in on it, 7 cents on the dollar. So I was getting like zero. And we in Canada didn't have the same, we didn't get, even our federal government went to Google advertising. Like we didn't get government ads anymore. We didn't get provincial government ads. We didn't get anything from any, they all just jumped on the Facebook bandwagon like the rest of everybody else.
Yep. Yep. And a lot of, it's not only advertising either. That's the hard part, is that local schools whack their kids up Facebook rather than ringing the newspaper and saying, come and check out our sport tab, which is really hard because we, none of us control Facebook. I mean, look at what's happening in world politics now. Facebook could be anything this time 12 months. But our newspapers, you can back to them in 10 years and we will have covered who was the ducks of the high school.
That's right. I often say in one of the slogans that we have in our newspaper is that my newspaper is the history of my community. So we've been around today, this year is actually 95 years. It's our 95th anniversary of our newspaper. And I often say you could go back at any point in history in those 95 years and grab an issue of the Pass Herald on that day, and you'll know exactly what happened. You can't do that on social media. And if you do, how do you know it's actually the truth, or that it hasn't been bastardized, or it hasn't been, all of those things, because there's no check and balance in digital, in social media like there is here. So I often say that our newspaper is the diary of my community.
Absolutely. And that we're not, so towns like yours or ours, until something dreadful happens and there's a fish kill in the Darling River or, something like that, it's not big enough to attract national news until there's a crisis, and that misses the whole story of the community and just focuses on crisis, and then they piss off again, there's a bushfire, all the major news are here, but there's no follow-up on how did that affect the community, how did the community rebuild, all that kind of stuff, because we're just not big enough to be of interest to anyone else. We have to do it for ourselves, and we're being stymied.
So I started my career in local papers, and the thing that I've eventually learned about the value of local newspapers much later in my career. So I started on a local paper that sold 4,000 editions, and I became news editor of a paper that sold 6 million. So I've worked on both sides of this. The thing that I've found fascinating in understanding the value of local media, and thank you, Lisa, for sharing so much of your views and all the publishers in Canada and all the others I've seen around the world, is this, which is that there are 4 billion people that read the news, and there are 20 stories a day globally that all of those people will read, and they will be peripherally interested in it, okay? They just absorb the news like the air around them. But when it's a pothole in their high street, that's very real and really matters. And so there's a massive difference between 4 billion people being a microscopic amount interested in something for 11 seconds, and one person being absolutely obsessed in it for an hour or 2 or 3, or even a week. And so I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm sorry if this feels kind of a little bit emotional, but it's a real question. Krista, how much do you love your community?
I have never lived anywhere else, and I have no plans on living anywhere else. My husband was born here, I was born here, my kids were born here. This is my town.
Lisa?
So, 100%.
Well, same with me. I mean, my children in my community are 5th generation. We actually emigrated from Europe to the town that I live in right now. I loved it so much that I ran for town council, and I'm a community leader in that sense. When you're vested in the place that you love, you want to see it thrive. And I really truly feel in my heart of hearts that community newspapers are the heart of a community. That we are the ones that have the death notices and the birth notices and the tragedies and all of the things that make a community are because of the local news. And if we lose that, link, I really think that there will be chaos. We talked about it when we were in PEI, Ricky, about disinformation, and that when there isn't venue for small newspapers, that there's a desert, and that vacuum gets filled by something, and it gets filled with disinformation and different medias that come in that maybe don't have the same love and the affection for your community that you do, and then it causes panic. So, local news is more than just a newspaper. It really is the heart and soul of a community, and those are the things I really feel we're fighting for. We're fighting for not just our livelihood and what we believe in newspapers, but we're fighting to keep our communities safe and whole and positive. And without it, I think there's chaos.
Krista, I might have cut you off a little bit there. Was there anything you wanted to add?
No, but that's exactly right. If we aren't there to fight for the community that we love, then who will? A corporate newspaper won't do it the way that we can, and the way that we want to.
No.
They won't even want to do it the way that we do.
And I think corporate media has actually caused us more harm than good in many ways, because they've forgotten who they were. I had my publisher, I talk about him all the time. He was 87 when he died. He came up feet first to the past era, literally, worked with me right till he died. And he always told me that I needed to remember that we bought our ink by the barrel, that we're the check and balance, and we're always going to have the last word, and that there's an inherent trust and oath that you need to take when you own a newspaper. And somehow the big corporations have lost that. They're just so worried about profits and bottom lines that they forgot who they were. And that's why you see, it's funny, whenever I really read the news, like if I want to read federal news or I want to read big government news, I read the paper on the far left and the paper on the far right, and somewhere in between I figure I'm going to find out what the truth is, and that's not the way it's supposed to be.
All right, so that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about next. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. So it takes huge courage to do what you're both doing. Okay, you're both sitting there, you're suddenly realizing that you're kind of the tip of the spear, as I said earlier on. And the growing theme I'm hearing, I did this on stage at both of the events you were at. I asked a question of the audience: do you think you're getting the leadership you need from the media industry that you're in? Yeah, that's the response I get, right? Look at it, right?
Don't get me started.
And then no one wants to put their hand up and say it when I'm on stage, but as soon as I come off the stage, people come over and just go, my boss is just trying to retire, what do I do about this? Yeah? And so we have a lack of leadership in the industry. And especially from the top at the big end of the industry, okay? You guys have stepped out of this mold and to fill the vacuum, to your point, Lisa, that they have left, right? How does that make you feel? Let's go to you, Krista, first. Did you ever see yourself as the leader of Australian media?
Oh God, no. No, but anyone that knows me knows I'm apt to bite off more than I can chew, so this is just another mouthful, I suppose. But I think in exactly the same way we were talking about corporate newspapers before, forgetting who they are, it's almost like they have locked themselves in to not being able to be part of something that is aiming for change. So they're so locked into to this corporateness that surrounds them that they cannot step to one side for good. So that's where we have that advantage, because we are small and we are independent, and Lisa was just able, she said before, within a couple of minutes she knew she wanted to be part of it. Tertia and I took a bit longer, of going backwards and forwards, but that's all. They're the only people we needed to discuss. We just sorted it between ourselves. If you are part of a massive international organisation, it's not only that you have your editor, your manager, your head of whatever in whatever country you're in, you ultimately have this business person at the top, usually, who once again is all about business. The filtering back, sorry, I shouldn't say the filtering back down to the newspaper, the people that are covering local news, is so far removed, may as well not be there at all.
All right, so let me get on. I think you're being overly kind. Let me be a little bit tougher. So I've been in the boardrooms of half a dozen of the world's largest global media companies in the past 6 or 8 months, okay? and I hear an awful lot of indignation about their right to exist. And I actually think they should exist. I think the world is in a better place if we have a plurality of media. But you can't moan and expect to win, and you can't negotiate with a bully, and you won't get anything unless you take it in the market that we're in. And so it's fascinating to me that almost all of the media CEOs that I talk to are male. The two people taking this lead are female. I don't know whether that's that you're just two Valkyries that have appeared from somewhere and you're going to war. I love it. But what I do have an issue with is that the people that are at the top of the tree, who are the first to step out with a moaning indignation about this, I'm really unhappy, are then the last ones to step up and put their necks on the line. And most of them are just trying to see time out to their retirement. Okay, so that's a little bit tougher than you said, but that's what I see in real life. I say to them again and again, I've said it on stage and I'll say it again now, indignation is a shitty business model and it's an even worse strategy. No one cares. If you're News Corp and you just say, how hard luck am I, no one in the world is going to have any sympathy. But weirdly, your messaging is wrong, but the thing you're trying to achieve is right. We do need a plurality of media, so we need a better strategy and we need a smarter way to fight it. But I don't think it's going to be fought by the big guys. I think it's going to be fought by people like you.
Yep.
So all
Honestly, they just disgust me. I'm so disgusted by the media, the big media in this country, and I think that the situation we are in is 100% the result of their cowardness and their inability to find their voice. And I have been in this lawsuit since 2022. I reached out to all the big media in my country and said, get on the bandwagon, let's get this story. This story didn't become a story until Ricky got a hold of it. It was not, I couldn't get airtime anywhere in this country. I still can't get airtime. They're hearing about it because of Ricky, because of his podcast, because he's on LinkedIn, because he's got a following. I still can't get them on board. I cannot get them to even discuss it, to talk about it when I bring it up. I am so disgusted with my own media, and that's why I did it. Because I wanted to look them in the face and say, you bunch of cowards. It took a woman in a town of 5,000 people to hold them accountable when you didn't have the guts to do it yourself.
And Lisa, they text me in the early hours of the morning, those people you were talking about, and ask my advice on stuff. And so, you know, they know they need it. They just, to your point, Krista, I think they find themselves in a cage. So let's talk about that, because I want to share an insight with you, and I'll get your opinion on this, and we can leave it after this. So, as I mentioned just now, I've been in all these boardrooms talking to all these big bosses. These people have hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value in their companies, and you know, hundreds of millions of readers. And they all say the same thing in various versions, okay? And I'm interested in your thoughts. So what they say is that they think that in this shakeout that's occurring in media at the moment, there's going to be a change. There's going to be the end of mass media, which is what we're seeing today, and there's going to be the rise of masses of media. And there's going to be lots and lots of small, dynamic little companies that are smaller but very, very focused on niches, and they'll survive. And they think that there'll probably be half a dozen or a dozen major global news brands that will survive, and they'll become the newspapers of record. And the names that come up again and again, I just wrote them down on a post-it note. So the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, the Times of India, the Times of London, these are the kinds of papers they're saying will survive. But the middle, all these newspapers that have gone running for page views, your Toronto Stars, Lisa, your news.com.au's, Krista, these guys, there's no existence in the future for the middle. The middle ends because it can't be funded by advertising, and it doesn't have anything that differentiates it to justify a subscription or a premium ad. And so all of these newspapers, The Sun in London, USA Today in America, all of these, none of those get mentioned by any of these people when they're talking about what survives. So what we see is a brighter future for smaller publishers, people who bring real, genuine value to their communities, and frankly, who give a shit, okay, if you don't mind me saying. And so some people call it the creator. I guess I live in the creator economy, you know, in that I'm a one-person publisher, but you're a couple of stages above that. But all of these major publishers and all of these major CEOs, with all of their power and everything, see the real growth in us. How do you feel about it?
Well, it's nice to hear about growth for a change. It's encouraging, and I think I can see what you're saying, because a lot of those, and it sounds weird because we've also just launched a second digital-only masthead as well, but some of those digital-only, or those more clickbait type news services, I mean, the Kate Ritchie story that's out and about at the moment is getting absolutely slammed. Sorry, I don't know.
That was a cool special effect. I think was that clickbait in actuality? I just witnessed.
It must have been. I actually don't know how that happened, but totally meant it. You know, the flack that the Daily Mail is getting for the Kate Ritchie story at the moment online. I mean, it might be driving their Facebook engagement, but I don't think it's great for them long term. Like, I think if they suddenly said, "Oh, we're closing down," then that would be good for their engagement, because I can see from what's being said about them at the moment that everyone would kind of applaud that if it was this week. So that middle digital only section, I can see what you're saying. It's kind of, again, I don't want to be unkind, but there's kind of no heart to what they're doing.
Empty calories was the way I described it in a boardroom recently. I said, you know, you can chase after it and you can chase after it and you chase after it and it's delicious on the lips for 5 minutes, but they're empty calories and they deliver nothing, actually. And so, you know,
so does that make us the like hearty carbs of the publishing world?
Well, we are the fillet steak of the publishing industry. Okay. Lisa, end of the middle. So in your market, you've got a very interesting space. You've got the Toronto Stars, you've got the Post Medias, you've got the Globe and Mail. Globe and Mail comes up a couple of times actually as somebody that might survive amongst that group. You know, how much of your market do you think is exposed as that kind of the clickbait, page view, programmatic advertising middle? How much of it do you think?
I think out of the big ones, probably 2 out of 3 for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think 2 out of the 3. I think that there's, in my opinion, there's one that kind of is doing it right. That's one that I go to all the time. But I think you're the same. And I've been saying this for a long time. You know, I said to somebody the other day, if you look at, I live in Crozes Pass, but my closest, biggest city is Calgary, Alberta, which is, I think, the 4th largest city in Canada. And I always said that they have 2 newspapers. Both are just really not doing well. And I said, what's going to succeed as newspapers in those communities is if you go to a community of 150 or 200,000 people and you create a little community-based publication. So it's centric to that area. So you pick, for example, Kensington, which has a lot of things going on, and you create a little publication that's just centric to that. It's the small newspaper idea, but in a city. I feel that those markets are still available because people in those communities want to see their kids playing soccer on the front page. And they want to see what's happening in their community that affects them locally, which is the whole idea of a small newspaper. And I think you're right. I think those mid groups are going to be gone. I think you're going to end up with 1 or 2 big papers that you trust. And I think in Canada specifically, they're very left or right, much like the same in the US with Fox and CNN. You're going to have 2 that are going to make it, but they're going to be complete polar opposites.
Yeah, everywhere now, Lisa. Everywhere in the world. Yeah.
Right. But in my little town, we're just chugging along. You know, we have 3,000 utility bills that go out, and I sell 2,000 newspapers. So at some point, they're reading my paper because we're a paid publication, so they're buying it. They have to buy a subscription to read a paper. So, you know, whether I'll be around 10 years from now, whether I can weather the next storm that's coming, because I weathered the Facebook decimation storm, I don't know. But what I will know is that at least if I go down, I went down fighting tooth and nail for this industry. And in the history books, 100 years from now, I'm going to be in there saying Lisa Zigatak fought for newspapers in this country. And they're going to say the rest of them were a bunch of cowards who didn't have the guts to step up and fight for their own industry.
Here. All right, so one question to finish on you then. So if the masses of media is on the rise, which benefits both of you, which I genuinely think is going to happen, all of the evidence suggests that's the case, we just need to kill Google to get there, right?
Yeah. I think it's already going down, so yeah.
Krista, thoughts?
Or force them to be fair.
Force them to be fair. So we don't need them to go, we just need them to play nice.
Look, there would have to be, like as far as a tech company, obviously they do good stuff with their, I can't think of the name of the section of Google that does the driverless cars and Dreammaker or something like that, like really innovative stuff. Agriculture in third world countries, like you don't. But as far as the anti-competitive bit, like that's got to go. You know, like if they can be forced to be fair, then we can enjoy the benefits of the other stuff that they do, because you don't feel guilty about enjoying those benefits, because, you know, if you can make them maybe I'm being too touchy-feely, but if it can be a more holistic company, and then we all survive. That would be great.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your work and